Hi, everyone, again. Welcome. My name is Cindy Lopez, and I'm the Director of Community Connections here at CHC. So, we're so glad that you're able to join us for this live Ask an Expert session today. And just to let you know, we are recording the session, so it will be available in our online resource library in about a week or so. And that's available free. You can access it 24/7, and we'll send a follow up email with the link and the information so you have it to everyone whose emails we have who have registered. So also note on the slide that you see in front of you that you're muted and your video's off in this Zoom webinar. So please use the chat and the Q&A to engage with us. We also are showing this on Facebook Live. So if you're watching on Facebook Live, please leave a comment or a question in the comments so we can include your questions as well. So to use the chat, so I think everyone knows to use the chat. You can just type right in the chat. And then for the questions, if you have questions, especially for the second part, we'll invite your questions from the audience. Please use the Q&A feature from on Zoom to ask your questions, and then we'll get to those in the second half of the session. So just a little bit of information about CHC for those of you who may not know. CHC, Children's Health Council, has been part of our local community on the peninsula for 70 years. We provide mental health and learning services for children, teens, and young adults. And we offer both evaluation and treatment in our clinical services, teletherapy mostly right now. And we also offer free 30-minute parent consultations with one of our clinicians. So that's just if you have questions or you're confused, you're not sure about what's going on with your child, that's a great way to get some more information, advice, and guidance about next steps. If you haven't checked out our website before, it's chconline.org. We encourage you to take a minute to do that. As I noted, we have a robust free online resource library with lots of resources, including articles and recordings of our previous Parent Ed sessions that you'll find valuable. We also have our Voices of Compassion podcast series that offers weekly episodes on topics that really matter to you. So we hope that you'll take advantage of all these things. Again, it's chconline.org. So for this session, the format is the first half will be a conversation with our experts. And in the second half, we'll take your questions. And again, please submit your questions anytime, starting now, via the Q&A feature on Zoom, or if you're on Facebook Live, you can just comment, add your questions in the comments. So actually, before we get started, here's a chance to use the chat feature on Zoom. So we'd love to hear from you. Where are you from, and what ages or grades are your kids? And you can just write your responses in the chat. So for our session this evening, we're hearing from lots of parents about the anxiety, social isolation, sleeplessness, lack of motivation that they're seeing in their kids as a result of our current circumstances. We all want our kids to be more hopeful and optimistic and resilient, but how does that happen? And so as we look at resilience more, we know that self-compassion is actually linked to resilience. So our focus this evening is on teaching self-compassion to kids to build resilience. We're privileged to have two of our own clinicians joining us this evening to share their expertise. Tony Cepeda is a licensed marriage and family therapist and a clinical program manager here at CHC with lots of experience working with kids and families. And we also are fortunate to have Adelyn Cohen with us, who is a doctoral psychology intern here at CHC. So thank you so much, Tony and Adelyn, for spending the evening with us. Actually, before we get started with some of our conversation, let's just take a look at the chat and see where people are from. So we have Morgan Hill, Mountain View, fourth grader, a 4 and a 6-year-old, 15 and 13 from San Francisco, Sunnyvale, Woodside, second grader, kindergartner, Wow, 16, 20, 23, ages of their kids. Santa Clara, and oh, here's a psychology student. Like, welcome. Palo Alto, age 14, daughter's 14. Some other folks from Palo Alto, 4 kids, 11, 8, 4, and 4. So there's a range here. We have some young kids and some teens, 8th graders, East Palo Alto. So thank you. Thank you all for sharing that. That just gives us an idea about who's in our audience. I'm going to say a little disclaimer here, and that is in our COVID lives, you know, everything blurs all together. And so I have my dogs in here with me this evening. So if I mute myself or turn my video off for a second, it's because I'm dealing with them. But just so you know. So Tony and Adelyn, thank you so much again for joining us. And let's get started. So, you know, you work a lot, obviously, parents and kids. And so what are you hearing from them about what their big concerns are right now? I think, you know, I mean, there are so many kinds of things going on with parents, but we kind of hear some trends. So talk about what you think, what you're seeing right now.
Adeline, would you like to start us off?
Sure, I can go ahead and start us off. So, definitely some of the things I'm seeing, a lot of kids who are, reporting being pretty socially isolated, really missing their friends, missing the camaraderie of being able to be in school. Also, lots of difficulties with sleep. And just like you said earlier, Cindy, some low motivation. I'm hearing a lot from parents too about their kids having difficulty pulling away from video games, some difficulties with defiance, and just kind of general overall increases in externalizing behaviors at home, especially among parents of kids who have ADHD or kids who tend to just have more energy. And then, just kind of across the board from the research, we're seeing that, both the pandemic and lockdown have been associated with increased anxiety and depressive symptoms in youth. And that's, definitely occurring more in adolescents and, likely some younger children as well. And really that makes sense given that, social isolation and loneliness do increase the risk of mental health difficulties. Even years in the future. So it's really important that we're helping out kids who are experiencing distress and these mental health difficulties.
Yeah, yeah. I agree with what Adeline shared. Um, Seeing a lot more anxiety and depression because of what we've had to experience in the last year. One issue I'm really concerned about is the isolation. And to me, that really is a red flag issue that there might be some serious issues, mental health issues happening for children. For parents, having difficulty with managing their kids at home, trying to balance out having to work and making sure their kids are actually attending school. That's been a big challenge. Lately, I've been hearing from parents just the uncertainty of going back to school and how to manage that. Some schools are going back with a hybrid model, and what does that mean? Are our kids going to be safe at school, returning? What are the rules? What are the restrictions? A lot of uncertainty right now.
Yeah, and sorry, I just want to follow up on that as well. I'm also seeing, just like Tony mentioned, a lot of increased stress among parents as well, especially given the health concerns, financial concerns, difficulties with balancing childcare and working, and overall parent well-being. Given that parents are also feeling isolated as well, especially when there's that lack of social support. And then there can also be an increase in relationship and marital conflict, which is also going to impact the entire family as a whole. And all of these things together can, create a lot of stress among parents, which can impact parenting behaviors or feelings of self-efficacy in parenting. And so, all that can also mean frustration tolerance, and, that can mean a lot of friction between kids and parents in home.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's part of the reason I think that we started with that question for both of you is that, like, we just want you all to know, our audience, the parents out there, like, you're not alone. Like, we are hearing, I'm sure that you're identifying with much of what Tony and Adelyn just mentioned, and everybody's kind of in the same boat, and we're all grappling, I think, with how do we deal with that? How do we stay afloat? How do we stay connected? How can I, as a parent, best support my child or my children in this? So, as we think about our kids, Tony and Adelyn, we want resilience for them, right? We want them to be able to experience all of this, but be able to still be hopeful and optimistic, and to bounce back from these setbacks. So as we think about our kids becoming more resilient, self-compassion plays a role there. So what is the relationship between self-compassion and resilience?
Yeah, I'll start us off this time, Adeline. So two big ideas here. One is self-compassion, the other is resilience. So with self-compassion, really the idea is to have compassion for yourself. Um, how do you do that? What does that mean? And really what it comes down to is when you think about having compassion for other people, you are empathetic, you sit down and listen, you're present, you are really focused on what's happening for somebody, and you're recognizing that they're going through a difficult time. So, self compassion, the idea is to be compassionate to yourself. And what that means for me, I came up with this little mantra, and it's three A's. It's awareness, awareness of what your thoughts and feelings are, acknowledgement, acknowledging what those feelings and thoughts are, and acceptance, accepting your feelings and thoughts. And then resilience, the idea there, it's a process of being able to adapt and adapt positively and well in the face of adversity, trauma, and tragedy. Now, everyone can admit this past year we've experienced a lot of adversity, trauma, and tragedy. And so the whole idea is melding the idea of being compassionate for yourself that, yes, things have been awful, and I have all of these thoughts and feelings that have affected me. Accepting that. And then the resiliency part is okay, what do we do to manage that? How do we take care of that?
Yeah, thank you, Tony. That was a really excellent explanation there. I think what's really interesting to kind of learn is that looking at this relationship between self-compassion and resilience. And the good thing is that kids are very resilient. Children in general tend to be much more resilient oftentimes than they think that they might be. And so that is very good news that going forward, most kids are, going to be okay. And most kids are really coping well throughout all of the major changes that are going on in their lives right now, and are quite flexible. And this idea of self-compassion, which is something that all children can learn and can use, not just children who need mental health care. And it's really associated with well-being, especially among adolescents. And it can also just help reduce negative self-views. So for those reasons, it helps increase resilience in children. So the more compassionate a child is towards themselves, the more resilient they're likely to be in the face of adversity. It's also, associated with curiosity across all ages, this connection between being kind to oneself and having the ability to adapt in the face of these threatening stressors is robust. And I think when kids can see that they're not alone in the things that they're going through, they're better able to manage those feelings of sadness and anxiety and difficult emotions.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing all that. And to our audience, just want you to know we do have some resources there on the slide at the end of the session tonight. And so you won't have the slides tonight, but you will get them next week. So if you want to look up some of those resources, what Tony and Adelyn were talking about, one researcher that's done a lot around self-compassion is Kristen Neff, and she has a lot of good stuff out there. Neff, Neff. So maybe, I don't know if we actually did this, but I'll ask, because I think you guys talked about this a little bit already. But if you wanted to say something more, add a footnote. How would you define self-compassion?
So I can take a stab at that. Kristen Neff, who you just mentioned, who's a researcher, it looks like the predominant researcher within self-compassion research at UT Austin. So she defines it as having three different components. So the first part is that self-kindness. So the idea of being kind to oneself, not being judgmental about one's perceived flaws or mistakes, and being accepting of those. A second part is going to be this idea of common humanity. So the idea that, an individual's experiences are just part of the human experience rather than just part of an isolated experience that they're having. So, if I'm going through something, it's really likely that a lot of other people are experiencing this too, and having that connection with others. And then the third part is going to be mindfulness. And so mindfulness is definitely a buzzword that's thrown around a lot. And so, just a quick definition here, that's really, trying to be aware and mindful of what's going on in the present moment, noticing your emotions, your reactions, and also, once you're noticing them, just being more accepting of, the fact that you may be having some painful thoughts, feelings, rather than over-identifying with them and fusing yourself with those negative thoughts. And so it really teaches, kids and all people of all ages, how to notice those more difficult thoughts and feelings, and then also that one can accept them without being judgmental and can let them go. And so, specifically, we were just talking about, of course, self-compassion as a whole, and specifically this mindfulness component has been found to, reduce difficulties with emotion regulation in individuals, and also can reduce self-criticism and enhance that idea of self-kindness. And, this is all really important, especially given that, we're talking about children, because self-compassion does tend to be the lowest during adolescence, during those teen years, where kids, are because the social environment is so important to them, they tend to be, constantly evaluating themselves, comparing themselves to others, and also, believing that, that others are very much paying attention to what they're doing and very much noticing their flaws. So if I do something embarrassing in public, everyone saw, everyone noticed, and everyone's going to be thinking about that forever, rather than recognizing, everybody messes up, everybody trips, every once in a while, those types of things.
So thank you, Adeline. And Tony, I also lost my light here. I also appreciated your 3 A's too. So, I think there are a couple different ways to look at it. And I think if you start looking at Kristen Neff stuff, there's some great resources there too. So, um, so as we think about teaching self-compassion to kids, right? What advice or guidance do you have for parents? Like, so this is probably really what parents are dying to hear right now. What can they actually do? What are kind of some of the practices that they can incorporate with their kids and their families to help teach self-compassion, help see, I can't even speak, teach self-compassion to their kids, and then maybe give some you talked about mindfulness, Adeline, so maybe give some examples of mindfulness that would work for different ages of kids. You'll see that I kind of combined a couple questions there that we were talking about. So there
Yeah.
you go.
So, what I'd like to say is, we're talking about self-compassion and resilience together and trying to build hope with our kids. In terms of resilience, the number one factor that determines whether a child builds resiliency or not is a solid, supportive relationship with a caring adult. And typically that's a parent. So there's a lot placed on a parent or caregiver in terms of fostering resilience in a child. Um, Now, with self compassion, and Adeline had mentioned this earlier, it's something that children typically can't do by themselves. They need some assistance with that. And so, from a resiliency perspective, that parent is really vital in terms of helping with self compassion. And basically, what that means to me is that I suggest to parents the importance of spending time with your child, not necessarily focusing on what's wrong or what's bad, spending time talking with your child, listening to them. And sometimes that means just talking about anything they want to talk about. And this is part of that self compassion and mindfulness. Whatever's on their mind, whatever they're feeling in the moment, let's talk about it. And the parent is there fully accepting what they have to say without judging them, without denying how they're feeling or thinking, or moving on to other things to like avoid whatever they're feeling. So to me, again, it's about the parent relationship with kids. Now, I know Adeline has all kinds of suggestions in terms of how to provide, resilience and help kids with self-compassion. So hand it over to Adeline.
Okay, great. And this is really just a continuation of what you were saying, Tony. I think, one of the main things is really helping kids to recognize that, other kids, other teens are going through really similar problems that they are, and that they are not alone. They are not the only ones who are experiencing this, and they're not isolated in this experience. I think it's really important, just like you said, Tony, also to model self-compassion towards yourself, because children learn by what they see their parents doing. And so the more compassionate you are towards yourself, rather than, dwelling on mistakes or your own flaws, or, being harshly criticizing yourself or judging yourself if you make a mistake at work, or if making negative comments about your appearance or your weight, things like that. The more that you model for your children that you accept yourself and the things that you do, and that you're kind to yourself, that's really going to help them learn how to do it. I think another thing that Tony just mentioned is really encouraging kids to be able to identify and talk about their thoughts and their feelings. And whatever it is that they are feeling regarding a certain stressor, or the pandemic, or even just having a rough day or not wanting to do schoolwork, just acknowledging that what they're feeling is valid and makes sense given their situation. Of course, that doesn't mean that they don't have to do their schoolwork. But if you let them know, it makes sense that you're having a hard time doing this, given that you aren't able to see your friends and you're not able to be there in person. And at the same time, it's still really important for you to learn and to complete your schoolwork so that when you do get back in person, you'll be prepared to do that. And so the important thing is that just acknowledging someone's feelings and validating them doesn't mean that you 100% agree with their choices or their decisions. I think also being able to encourage perspective taking. So if a child is down on themselves or saying, "Oh, I got a bad grade on this test. I'm really bad at this, or I can't do this," asking them what they would say to a friend, how they would respond to a friend who presented the same problem. Would they tell their friend, "Oh yeah, you're terrible at this, you're never going to get a good grade"? Or would they say, "It's just one test, it's just one grade, it's not a big deal, it's not going to affect your grade for the entire semester, you shouldn't be so hard on yourself"? So asking them what they would say to one of their friends, and then switching it to be about themselves and helping them kind of think through that. And I know I have a whole bunch of other suggestions, but I also know that I have been talking a lot and it's time for audience questions. So I will go ahead and pause for now.
That's okay. It's all good. So we actually do have we have received some questions from the audience, and if you're listening in either on Zoom or Facebook, keep the questions coming. We have the second half of our session now to really take your questions. So here's a question. This family has a second grader who's experiencing anxiety that's coming out with frequent bathroom accidents, which wasn't an issue before COVID. Sounds like there is an actual diagnosis of anxiety, and her doctor has said that this is linked to anxiety. So I think the question is, how can parents really support her with her high anxiety? And would thinking about, especially our topic this evening, how, a little bit of how does self-compassion maybe come into that?
I'll give a stab at this question. I had mentioned earlier how parents are really important in this process of self-compassion, resiliency building. And one suggestion, and I'll give a couple, but one suggestion, Adelyn had mentioned this, how, for the parent, how is it that you deal with stress and anxiety? Because your child will pick up from what you are doing and will, to a certain extent, copy you in terms of how you deal with stress. I'm not saying that the parent is having the same issue, but that is a good place to start with role modeling how to manage your own anxiety and being able to share that with your child. Of course, it's not appropriate to share with a second grader all the things that are stressing you out, but just talking about, yeah, when I get stressed out, I take deep breaths, or when I get stressed out, I go for a walk. So, basic things like that. The other suggestion that I would have is that it's okay to just talk about what's going on. And again, try not to judge the behavior. Let's focus more on what you're feeling. How does this feel? And what do you think? And try not to judge your child as they share. And then the third suggestion is definitely you need to stay in touch with the pediatrician. Make sure that there's a coordinated effort with any provider that they coordinate services with the pediatrician.
I'd also just like to echo, that this is something that does happen when children are under, higher amounts of stress. Sometimes you do see some of these regressive behaviors. So that can be toileting accidents, wanting to spend more time with parents or having difficulty separating from them, problems with sleeping, thumb sucking, those types of things. And so that is something that is seen among children who are undergoing stress. At the same time, just to echo what Tony said, making sure that you're staying in touch with your pediatrician, and also, I'd also encourage maybe working with a mental health provider as well, as there are different interventions that can be done to help with toileting accidents, and also to kind of get to the underlying piece of what's driving that anxiety, and how to cope with it.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. Here's another question. So, in this family, they say pretty much everyone else we know is taking more risks than we are. So, I assume that means more risks with regard to COVID, seeing people, etc. So, taking more risks than we are. So, our child doesn't have other children in his same situation. And so, how do we help him find self compassion? If the child's probably feeling a little isolated, a little lonely, seeing his friends kind of getting together and maybe he's not. So how does self-compassion play a role in that? How would you respond?
I'm happy to go ahead.
Yeah.
So I think, I think one of the things I would say is just, talking about it with your child, and kind of letting them be able to express to you, I am feeling lonely. It's hard not to see my friends, and acknowledging that it is hard not to be with your friends. And at the same time, you have these rules, or you have these boundaries to help keep them safe. And so, helping that your child understand that you're not doing this in a punitive manner. It's really to help them, and because you care about them. I think also trying to find other activities that your child can engage in. Exercise and movement is extremely important for kids and for mental health. And so any activities, even if they're socially distanced or outside at a park, trying to allow your kid to get some of that exercise and some movement in. And I think also, as much as you can encourage your child to talk with friends in other ways. So, the amazing thing during this pandemic is that we have so much technology available to us at our fingertips. And so whether that's, FaceTiming with friends, texting them, talking to them over video games, however, even if, you feel comfortable having outdoor play dates with your child, just finding ways to be flexible and help them connect with their friends and have that social interaction.
Yeah, I just a couple ideas to add to what Adelyn said. I really like the idea of meeting friends at a park and just socially distancing. One, your child gets to be outside. Two, they get to be physically active. And three, if you do it in a safe way and everybody's wearing a mask, everyone is socially distancing, they can have fun with their friends. They could see their friends. Another suggestion is there are all kinds of games online that kids can play with their peers. So I suggest that you just Google it, look for games kids can play with peers online. And so there are a lot of different options there.
Thank you, Tony and Adeline. And I think some parents, I think about more gaming and as more screen time. And so I think one thing that came up in a session that we did yesterday, another parent ed session we did yesterday, was there's a difference between, when you think about screen time, there's a difference between passive and active. And you want to look for ways that your kids can be actively engaged with screen time. So
Yeah.
anyway,
Yeah.
so let's. Okay.
Oh, and you know what? I had one more
Yeah.
thing I wanted to add. I think because I think we glossed over this. We talked about mindfulness early on, but we didn't finish touching on that. And so another thing that can be really helpful for children is to practice mindfulness. And this is not something that anyone expects you to be able to figure out on your own. There are lots of apps. There are lots of videos on YouTube about how to be, more mindful for kids, who are in preschool all the way up, to teenagers and to adults. I'm happy to put some resources for websites in the chat that provide, some links to videos for mindfulness. And also there's one through Stanford that has its own mindfulness program. That ways that you can help to teach your child to be more aware of what's going on in the present moment, so that they don't get stuck kind of thinking about the past or worrying about the future.
So Adeline, that actually is kind of one of the questions here that was asked. And so I don't know if you want to add anything to it based on the question. I'll just say it. So do you have any recommendations for resources to teach mindfulness to children in engaging ways? And you mentioned a couple of them. Is there anything else that you want to add based on that question? You don't have to, but.
No, I think thankfully there are about a bazillion resources for teaching mindfulness to kids out there. I think it's, a lot of it is about, finding videos that you think would be helpful, or things that, are keeping kids engaged. Lots of things on YouTube. I think for kids, even just helping them, a first step to learning and practicing mindfulness is to start with deep breathing and becoming aware of your breath. So really paying attention to your breath, the feeling of your breath coming in, noticing as it moves through your body, and then moving back out. And then, noticing if your thoughts start to move away, because, they always do. That's how our brains work. Our thoughts start to drift. Just kind of noticing that and bringing your thoughts back to your breath. In younger kids, that can also be, and with older kids, mindfulness related to food, not engaging in other activities while eating. So not watching TV or reading or playing games while eating, but noticing, even having people go around the dinner table and describe, this is what I'm tasting. I'm feeling these different textures in my mouth from the food. This is what I'm noticing happening. And also when kids are upset or feeling anything, asking them, okay, what are you feeling in your body right now? And helping to train their awareness to point inwards to, I'm anxious, my breathing is going really fast, my heart is beating quickly, maybe my palms are sweaty, or even excitement, I have a excited feeling in my stomach. So helping them be able to notice that mind and body connection. And I'll go ahead and kind of share some resources. Can I just put them in the chat? Does that work?
Yep.
So one is Imagine Action. It's this great program through Stanford that teaches mindfulness and explains mindfulness in a very kid-friendly way. Another one is a resource that I just recently found that's through Tulane, that talks about different kind of self-care and coping activities. It's not specifically geared towards children. It's for adults and adolescents as well. And it has some links to different kind of mindfulness videos.
Great, thank you. And I think so. Just want to mention, so there was a follow-up comment to the question about the family who is not taking as many risks. They just said that going to parks doesn't really feel like a great option for them because there are a lot of people who are not wearing masks there,
Okay.
and they have some high risk people in their family.
Oh, okay.
So they
Yeah.
do a lot of virtual play dates, which is great. I mean, your idea about,
Nice.
the games and stuff. So anyway, just to let you know.
Yeah.
Um, so
Yeah, I'm sorry. I mean, it's too bad that not everyone follows the same protocols. I think just as another idea, it's not directly related to friends, but connections with family members, especially family members that kids have not seen in a long time, I think is really important. So having those phone calls or a Zoom meeting or face-to-face time with a grandparent or an aunt and uncle that they haven't seen in a while, I think really helps with uh, maintaining connections.
yeah, that's a great idea too. And I know one of the things that um, my grandniece does with her grandparents who are in Tennessee and they're out here in California. The kids are out here in California. They read books to her
Yeah,
um, via FaceTime.
that's
So,
wonderful.
so that's kind
Wonderful.
of fun.
Yeah.
Let's go back to there was a question about, oh, here it is. So I think one of you might have been Tony talked about parents uh, saying how they feel to their kids.
Hmm.
And so this question is, what if your child hates discussing their feelings and situations, even though even though the parents are modeling discussing these kinds of things and feelings, the child is
Yeah.
very resistant, it sounds like.
Well, sometimes, and there are schools of thought that say that resistance is okay and that resistance is important. So, really, what it comes down to is it's hard. People are really struggling, and for some people, some kids, talking about an issue just makes it worse. And so, my first suggestion is it's okay. And this is part of that teaching self-compassion. It's okay. I can accept that you don't want to talk about it. But when you're ready to talk about it, I'll be here. Another suggestion is maybe we don't talk about how you're feeling. Maybe we just talk about what was the best part of your day today, and we'll focus on that. Or what did you learn in science today? And part of having any kind of conversation with your child is building that relationship. And it's a process. You won't be able to solve things in one meeting with your child. If you build a relationship, eventually you'll get to a point where you can talk about all kinds of different things.
And another thought too, as I through all of my years in education and working in schools, is giving children language for their feelings is another important aspect of that because they often don't know, especially the younger they are. Well,
Yeah.
sometimes the older they are too, but it's it's just hard. They don't know how to talk about how they're
Yeah.
feeling because they don't
Yeah.
have that
The
language.
words. Yeah. And
Yeah.
thank you for saying that, Cindy. That's a good point.
Do you either of you have any resources off the top of your head? I know this wasn't a question we prepared for, but that like to for teaching kids about language for their feelings. You don't have to.
Oh,
I can look something
yeah.
up too.
Okay. All right.
No worries.
Yeah.
No worries. Okay. So, so this question is um, a 13-year-old with ADHD is not doing well with distance learning. I mean, sorry, he is doing well. Phew.
Oh,
He is doing well with distance learning. He's getting good grades, but the parents are worried that he's not going to want to attend school in person. Like they're going back to a hybrid model, and he's not going to want to attend school in person because he's, he feels like he's doing so well. And he's and another piece of this, another question that came out too, is as kids, some kids feeling really comfortable at home and in that situation. And so it's that, how do we get our kids to re-engage and get back out there and be with their friends? And I also wonder, how this is a little bit away from the self-compassion conversation, but how do they, you know, um, that it's really hard. It's our experience, and you said this, Tony and Adelyn too, is like has been isolating. So that interaction hasn't been normal or typical, so to speak. So how can parents help their kids think about going back to school and re-engaging?
And just to make sure I understand, when you say your experience, do you mean the child's experience, on over the computer, or do you mean parent-child experience together?
So I'm not sure what I said, but
Okay. Oh, that's all
so
right.
the child, but anyway, the child's doing well, right, with distance learning and getting good grades,
Yeah,
and is just not wanting to go back to
yeah,
school. And so their experience, the child's experience right
I
now
understand.
is, does that make sense? Okay.
Yes. So I think there's two different important points here. I think the first thing is, what is the reason that your child is doing well during distance learning, and helping your child kind of figure out what it is about distance learning that's been helpful for them, and then helping to either problem solve or brainstorm, or even talking with the school about ways that you can help to replicate that experience when they're back in school, so that they feel supported and prepared to be able to re-enter. Another thing I want to, mention is that a lot of, children may have difficulty going back to school due to anxiety or worry. Whether that's worry about the pandemic, whether that's worry about reintegrating back into friends, or whatever it is that they're worried about how classes will look, those types of things. I think helping your child express what it is that is kind of making them hesitant to want to go back to school, and also helping to remind them that even if they are worried in the beginning, thinking back to examples when they may have been worried or anxious in order to do something, and then they did it, and then their anxiety decreased, whether that it was immediately or over time, whether it's their first day of school, they felt anxious to go back, the next year, and then they were there for a week, and then they felt comfortable again. So helping them remember times that they did feel worried or they did struggle with something initially, and then they were able to get through it, and it ended up being a positive experience for them. And I think also, again, just kind of validating why they're having concerns or difficulties related to going back to school, and at the same time, helping them, understand the importance, and helping them think about maybe what they may be missing out on by not being in school, and kind of weighing the things that they can look forward to.
Yeah, I love what you're saying here, Adeline. I mean, 2 points that stand out for me in terms of what you said. One is acknowledging what they're feeling, especially if it's anxiety regarding going back to school. The other thing that I appreciate you saying is recognizing what they did well and maybe transferring that to in person school. Um, One piece I would add is that parents problem solve together with your child to figure out together what are some options in terms of making a smooth transition back to school. The other point is eventually your child will need to go back to school. If it's not this year, maybe in the fall, probably most definitely 2022, which, it's kind of mind blowing to think that far ahead. But eventually, all children will be expected to go back to school. So let's figure out how we're going to deal with it and deal with it in the best way possible.
So there is a question here, and I'm going to try and respond to it because I think it's a different kind of question. So, for those who are looking for help for kids in these situations that are being talked about, building self compassion, mindfulness, anxiety, all those kinds of things, where can we find more resources? So, that question, we actually are including resources at the end of the session. In just a couple minutes, we'll put a slide up that has some resources. Adelyn put some or a couple in the chat as well. Those, I realize you don't have access to those this evening, but you can access them next week when we get them all uploaded to the resource library, the slides and the recording. And then there's a follow-up question to that is, are there any organizations that are accepting volunteers or internships? I'm not quite sure what that is about. So if you have whoever asked that question, if you have a follow-up question, do you mean, are you saying volunteers or internships for adolescents? It's tricky right now because I know that there are not a lot of organizations that are accepting volunteers because of all of the requirements around staying healthy. But there are some youth advisory groups that teens can get involved in around mental health. One of them is Safe Space, which is in Menlo Park. Bring Change to Mind is another one that's they create clubs on high school campuses. So those are just a couple. So as we kind of think about closing up our time this evening, Adelyn and Tony, I'm wondering what if there were one thing that you want parents to walk away with as a result of listening in tonight and hearing this session, what would that be? What would you want them to really remember or think about as a result of this?
You want to go, Adeline? You want me to go first?
You can go ahead. It was a great question. I'm still
Yeah,
putting my thoughts together.
sure. I think I will reflect on what I had said earlier, that the number one key factor in building resilience is a supportive and caring relationship with an adult. And to me, parents, you are the key. You are the leaders, you are the role models. You set the example, you set the tone for your children. So, and Adelaide had mentioned this earlier as well, that part of what you can do to set the tone and set an example is to have self compassion for yourself, an acknowledgement and awareness and acceptance of what your thoughts and feelings are, and letting your children know and just showing them how you deal with that.
And Tony stole a bit of mine,
Ah,
but
yeah, no.
I just want to echo what he's saying about the importance of spending quality time with your kids, because I think there's a lot of feeling of, well, I spend all day with my kids. We're all in the same house or the same apartment together all the time. That I think there's a big difference between everyone going about their own activities in the same household versus spending some quality time together. Especially time where you're not directing your kids, you're not trying to teach them something, and just kind of letting them kind of run the activity. So whether that's playing together, it could be reading together. It can even be watching a movie together, just as long as you're spending time together in a positive way, and kind of noticing any of the positive behaviors that you really enjoy that your child is doing. That's going to help them feel really good. And I think, another thing is a part of self-compassion is recognizing that it's okay to ask for help. So if you are, concerned that, your child may be struggling, or even that you may be struggling, it is okay. And it is, encouraged to ask for help. And I also wanted to add to the earlier question, in regards to resources. In order, if I know a lot of individuals have wonder, how do I even find a therapist or a mental health clinician if I'm wanting to see one? And so please, Tony and Cindy, add in if you have other suggestions. But I would say a great place to start is either by, it could be calling your insurance company and asking them for providers in the area, or calling your county's behavioral health access line, and they'll be able to set you up with services as well. And again, remembering most providers are still providing telehealth right now. So as long as you're in the same state as them, they don't have to be right down the street. And so that opens up a lot more clinicians that you can work with.
Thank you. Thank you both. A couple of things that I am in this unique position where I get to be a part of these sessions with great people like Tony and Adelyn and other experts in our clinical services at CHC. And so a few things that have stood out to me over the past several months, things I've heard from them is, parents, we know that you have this at least dual role, right? It could be crazier than that, but parent and teacher. And so if it ever comes down to, you have to choose between being a parent or being a teacher, choose parent. Like, that relationship that you have is the most important. So that was one thing that one of our clinicians said recently. And also, Tony has said this, so has Adelyn, listen to your child. Just take some time to listen to them. Try not to talk to them as much as you listen to them. And then finally, your good enough is good enough. Don't try to be perfect. Don't get, exercise some of your own self-compassion and grace. So thank you for being with us this evening. If you're, as Adelyn just said, if you are thinking about reaching out and for help and want to talk to a mental health practitioner, we are here for you at CHC. Here's contact information on this slide. And again, you can just reach out, call any of that number or the care team, email, and just tell them, what's on your mind, and they'll be able to link you up with the appropriate person to talk to. Tell them that you're interested in a free 30-minute consultation. That's another way to go about it. There's no strings attached there, really no strings attached. You can just reach out and talk about what's going on and get some advice and guidance regarding next steps. So thank you so much again for joining us. We are honored that you've chosen to spend some of your evening with us. So we hope to see you again soon.